Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stirred the massive pot of beef stew. The kitchen at Forward Operating Base Delta was her domain, a place where the aroma of home-cooked meals provided comfort to soldiers thousands of miles from their families. At 34, Maria had been cooking for military personnel for over 8 years, but this assignment in Afghanistan was different. She wasn't just feeding regular troops anymore. She was responsible for feeding some of America's most elite warriors. The Navy SEALs who operated out of this remote base were unlike any soldiers she had encountered before. They moved with a quiet confidence, spoke in hushed tones, and carried themselves with an intensity that made the air around them feel electric. Maria had learned not to ask questions about their missions or their comings and goings. All she needed to know was that these men needed proper nutrition to perform their dangerous work, and she took that responsibility seriously. Lieutenant Commander Jake was the first SEAL to acknowledge her presence beyond a simple nod. He had walked into her kitchen one evening, drawn by the smell of her grandmother's enchilada recipe. His eyes, weary from weeks of operations, had lit up when he tasted her cooking. That moment had created an unspoken bond between the cook from Texas and the warrior from California. The base itself was a study in controlled chaos. Helicopters came and went at all hours, their rotors beating against the thin mountain air. The compound was surrounded by towering peaks that seemed to touch the sky, their snow-capped summits a stark reminder of how isolated they truly were. Maria's kitchen sat at the heart of it all, a warm beacon where exhausted soldiers could find a moment of normalcy. Each morning, Maria arrived before dawn to begin preparations for the day. She knew the SEALs preferred protein-heavy meals before missions, so she would have steak and eggs ready by 5 in the morning. For the support staff, she prepared heartier breakfast options, pancakes, bacon, and fresh coffee that she ground herself from beans shipped in from the States. The routine never varied, and she took pride in the consistency she provided in an environment where nothing else was certain. The other kitchen staff respected Maria's dedication, though some questioned why she went to such lengths for soldiers who rarely spoke to her. She couldn't explain it herself, but something about these men reminded her of her younger brother who had died in Iraq 5 years earlier. Perhaps feeding them properly was her way of honoring his memory, or maybe it was simply who she was, someone who showed love through food. The SEALs began to notice her extra efforts. Petty Officer, the team's medic, started leaving small notes of thanks when he finished his meals. Sergeant First Class, Tommy would occasionally help her carry heavy supplies from the delivery trucks. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the team leader, made sure his men cleaned up after themselves in her dining area, a courtesy not always extended by other units. As weeks passed, Maria learned to read the team's moods through their eating habits. Before dangerous missions, appetites were smaller, more focused. After successful operations, the men would linger over their meals, sometimes sharing stories from home. When they returned from particularly difficult assignments, they would eat in silence, processing experiences that Maria could only imagine. One evening, Lieutenant Commander approached her with an unusual request. His team was preparing for an extended mission deep in enemy territory, and he wanted to know if she could prepare individual meal packages, something portable but nutritious that could sustain them for several days. Maria spent the entire night researching military nutrition requirements and developing recipes that would provide maximum energy while remaining lightweight and non-perishable. The result was a collection of homemade energy bars, dried meat jerky seasoned with her special blend of spices, and carefully portioned trail mix that included nuts, dried fruits, and dark chocolate. Each package was wrapped with care and labeled with the individual SEAL's name. When saw the finished products, he was visibly moved by the personal attention she had given to each one. The base commander, Colonel Hayes, had initially been skeptical of Maria's unconventional approach to military food service. However, she couldn't argue with the results. Morale in the dining facility had improved significantly since Maria's arrival, and she had received fewer complaints about food quality than any previous deployment. The SEALs, in particular, seemed to appreciate having someone who understood that a good meal could provide psychological comfort as well as physical sustenance. As summer turned to autumn in the Afghan mountains, Maria had become an integral part of the base's ecosystem. She knew which soldiers preferred their coffee black and which ones needed extra carbohydrates after night missions. Her kitchen had become more than a place to eat. It was a gathering point where warriors could decompress and remember what they were fighting to protect. The atmosphere in the base shifted dramatically on a cold October morning when Maria noticed the SEALs moving with unusual urgency. Their typical pre-mission routine was different this time, more intense, more focused. Lieutenant Commander's jaw was set in a way she had never seen before, and the other team members spoke in even quieter tones than usual. Something significant was about to happen. Maria prepared their requested meals without asking questions, but she could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. The men ate quickly, efficiently, their minds already focused on whatever lay ahead. Chief Williams took a moment to thank her personally, something he had never done before a mission. His handshake lingered just a second longer than necessary, and Maria sensed this wasn't just politeness. The mission briefing had been classified above her security level, but Maria could piece together fragments of information from the increased activity around the communications center. Additional personnel had arrived from headquarters, and she had been asked to prepare meals for a larger group of support staff who would be monitoring the operation around the clock. As the SEALs departed in their modified helicopters, Maria watched from her kitchen window. The aircraft disappeared quickly into the mountainous terrain, swallowed by the pre-dawn darkness. She returned to her work, but something felt different about this particular departure. The silence that followed seemed heavier than usual. The next 24 hours passed without any word from the team. This wasn't entirely unusual. Some missions required complete radio silence, but Maria noticed the growing concern among the base's leadership. Colonel Hayes made frequent visits to the communications center, and the intelligence officers worked in shifts, monitoring various channels for any sign of the missing team. Maria kept herself busy by preparing additional rations and maintaining an around-the-clock meal service for the personnel tracking the mission. She brewed endless pots of coffee and made sure sandwiches were available at all hours. Staying busy helped her manage the growing anxiety that gnawed at her stomach. On the second day, fragments of concerning intelligence began filtering back to the base. A local informant reported unusual Taliban activity in the region where the SEALs were operating. Intercepted communications suggested that enemy forces were aware of an American presence in their territory. The pieces of information painted a troubling picture, but nothing was confirmed. Colonel Hayes called an emergency briefing for all essential personnel, including Maria. The colonel's expression was grim as she delivered the devastating news. Satellite imagery and human intelligence sources indicated that the SEAL team had been captured. Their mission had been compromised, and they were now being held in a Taliban stronghold approximately 50 miles northeast of the base. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 6 of America's most elite warriors were now prisoners of one of the most ruthless terrorist organizations in the world. The Taliban's treatment of captured American soldiers was well documented and horrifying. Every person in that briefing room understood that time was running out. Maria felt her legs weaken as she processed the information. These weren't just soldiers to her anymore. They were men she had fed every day, whose preferences she knew by heart, whose quiet thanks had brightened her mornings. The thought of Williams and the others in enemy hands made her physically ill. The colonel outlined the rescue operation being planned, but the challenges were enormous. The Taliban stronghold was heavily fortified, located in terrain that favored defenders, and surrounded by hostile populations who would report any American movement. A direct military assault would likely result in the execution of the prisoners before they could be reached. As the briefing concluded, personnel began receiving new orders. Non-essential staff would be evacuated to more secure locations within 48 hours. The base would be reduced to skeleton operations, while special operations forces planned and executed the rescue mission. Maria's name appeared on the evacuation list. The evacuation order made perfect sense from a military perspective. With the SEALs compromised, the base's primary mission was temporarily suspended. Keeping unnecessary personnel in a forward position that might soon become a target was illogical. The wise thing to do was to follow orders and return to safety. But Maria couldn't bring herself to accept the evacuation order. The idea of abandoning the base while and his team were suffering in enemy hands felt like betrayal. These men had trusted her to take care of them, and now they needed that care more than ever. Even if they weren't physically present, the rescue teams would need support, and she could provide that support. When Colonel Hayes personally approached Maria about the evacuation, she found herself making a decision that surprised them both. She would not be leaving with the other non-essential personnel. She would remain at the base and continue to provide food services for the rescue operations. The colonel initially refused, citing security protocols and safety concerns. Maria's response was simple but firm. The rescue teams would need proper nutrition to perform at their peak, and she was the best person to provide that support. Furthermore, when the captured SEALs were rescued, they would need immediate access to proper food and care. She had been taking care of these men for months, and she wasn't about to abandon them now when they needed her most. The conversation with Colonel Hayes lasted over an hour, with the colonel listing every regulation and safety protocol that Maria's decision would violate. But Maria had made up her mind. She had found her purpose in this remote corner of Afghanistan, and that purpose didn't end just because her soldiers were temporarily unreachable. Finally, Colonel Hayes relented. Maria would be allowed to remain, but under strict security protocols. She would be confined to the base perimeter, given additional safety briefings, and required to follow emergency procedures without question. If the situation deteriorated further, she would be forcibly evacuated regardless of her preferences. The base transformed overnight into something Maria barely recognized. Most of the familiar faces had departed on evacuation flights, leaving behind only essential military personnel and a handful of specialists who would support the rescue operation. The dining facility that had once buzzed with conversation now echoed with the footsteps of a much smaller, more focused group of professionals. Within hours of the evacuation, a new team of Special Operations Forces arrived. These weren't regular soldiers or even typical special forces. They were members of elite units whose names Maria wasn't cleared to know. They moved with the same quiet intensity as SEALs, but with an additional edge that spoke of years spent in the world's most dangerous places. The rescue team's leader introduced himself simply as Major. He was a lean man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that seemed to calculate risks and probabilities with every glance. When he learned that Maria had chosen to remain behind, his initial reaction was skepticism. Why would a civilian cook risk her life for soldiers she barely knew? Maria's answer was straightforward. These men had been her responsibility for months, and that responsibility didn't end because they were in enemy hands. Moreover, the rescue teams would need proper nutrition to maintain their effectiveness during what would undoubtedly be an extremely demanding operation. Major studied her for a long moment before nodding his acceptance. The next several days were unlike anything Maria had experienced in her military service career. The base operated in a state of controlled urgency as intelligence analysts, communications specialists, and tactical planners worked around the clock to develop a rescue plan. Maria adapted her cooking schedule to support the 24-hour operations, providing meals at irregular intervals to accommodate the various teams' shifting schedules. She learned to read the mood of the operation through the eating habits of the rescue personnel. During planning phases, they consumed steady, methodical meals while studying maps and intelligence reports. As the mission approached, appetites became more focused on high-energy foods and quick nutrition. The tension was palpable, but it was channeled into productive preparation rather than nervous anxiety. Intelligence updates about the captured SEALs filtered in sporadically, each piece of information closely guarded but occasionally shared with Maria by sympathetic personnel who understood her investment in the men's welfare. The Taliban was holding them in a compound that had been built into the side of a mountain, using natural cave systems enhanced with man-made fortifications. The location was nearly impregnable to conventional assault. Satellite imagery revealed that the compound housed not just the captured Americans, but also high-value Taliban leadership and their families. This complicated any rescue attempt enormously, as civilian casualties could trigger international incidents and propaganda victories for the enemy. The rescue would need to be surgical in its precision. Major's team developed multiple contingency plans, each more complex than the last. They studied the compound's layout, guard rotations, supply deliveries, and even the daily routines of the inhabitants. Every piece of intelligence was analyzed, cross-referenced, and incorporated into evolving tactical approaches. Maria found herself contributing to the mission in unexpected ways. Her experience managing food logistics for large groups proved valuable when the planners needed to understand the compound's supply requirements. She helped them calculate how much food would be needed to sustain the number of people satellite imagery suggested lived there, which helped intelligence analysts confirm population estimates. More importantly, Maria began preparing specialized nutrition packages for the captured seals. She knew each man's dietary preferences and medical requirements from months of feeding them. Was lactose intolerant, had a mild nut allergy, and Williams had been managing blood sugar issues. When the rescue succeeded, these men would likely be in poor physical condition and would need carefully planned nutrition to aid their recovery. Working with the base's medical officer, Maria developed recovery meal plans that would provide maximum nutrition while being gentle on digestive systems that might have been compromised by poor prison conditions. She prepared electrolyte solutions, high-protein broths, and easily digestible foods that could help restore strength without overwhelming damaged systems. The psychological aspect of her preparations was equally important. Maria knew that familiar flavors could provide comfort and hope to traumatized individuals. She prepared small portions of each seal's favorite dishes from her kitchen, packaged them carefully, and made them ready for immediate transport once the rescue succeeded. As the days passed, Maria also became an unofficial morale officer for the rescue team. Her kitchen became a gathering place where stressed personnel could find a moment of normalcy amid the intense preparation. She learned the names and preferences of the new arrivals, providing them with the same care she had given's team. The rescue plan that finally emerged was breathtakingly complex. It involved multiple helicopter insertions, diversionary attacks to draw defenders away from the prison area, electronic warfare to disrupt enemy communications, and precision strikes to neutralize specific threats without harming prisoners. The timing would need to be perfect, with each element of the operation synchronized to the second. Maria's role in the actual rescue would be to maintain base operations and prepare immediate medical and nutritional support for the returning personnel. She would be among the first people the rescued SEALs would see when they returned to safety, and she took this responsibility seriously. The night before the rescue mission, Major visited Maria's kitchen one final time. He thanked her for choosing to remain and acknowledged that her dedication had inspired his own team's efforts. They discussed the immediate post-rescue procedures, and he assured her that everything possible was being done to bring and his men home alive. Maria spent that final night preparing everything she could think of that might help the rescued men recover from their ordeal. She cooked their favorite meals, prepared medical nutrition supplements, and even wrote small welcome-back notes to include with their food packages. She worked through the night, using the familiar routines of cooking to manage her anxiety about the approaching mission. As dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, Maria could hear the distant sound of helicopters warming up for departure. The rescue operation was beginning, and within hours, she would know whether her decision to stay behind had been worthwhile. The morning of the rescue operation dawned crisp and clear, with visibility that would favor the helicopter pilots but also make their aircraft visible to enemy observers. Maria watched from her kitchen window as the rescue teams conducted their final equipment checks, their movements precise and purposeful despite the enormous pressure they faced. Major's assault force departed in waves, with different elements launching at carefully calculated intervals. The primary rescue team lifted off first, followed by diversionary units and support helicopters. Within 30 minutes, the base had returned to an eerie quiet that felt almost supernatural after days of intense preparation activity. Maria found herself alone with a skeleton crew of communications personnel, medical staff, and security guards. The communications center became the heart of the base's operations, with radio operators maintaining contact with the various elements of the rescue mission. She could hear fragments of tactical communications as she moved through the facility, but the coded language revealed little about how the operation was progressing. The first several hours passed in agonizing silence. Maria kept herself busy by maintaining constant food preparation, ensuring that hot meals would be available whenever the rescue teams returned. She prepared multiple contingencies: celebration meals if the mission succeeded, comfort food if it failed, and medical nutrition if the rescued personnel required immediate care. Around midday, the tempo of radio communications suddenly intensified. Maria could hear the urgency in the voices of the radio operators, though she couldn't understand the technical details being discussed. Something significant was happening, but whether it was positive or negative remained unclear from her position in the kitchen. Dr. Foster, the base's senior medical officer, appeared in Maria's kitchen with a request that made her stomach clench with worry. The medical team needed to prepare for multiple casualties, including potential injuries to the rescue team members, as well as the rescued SEALs. The doctor asked Maria to prepare liquid nutrition supplements that could be administered to injured personnel who might not be able to eat solid food. The implications of this request were sobering. Maria had been focusing her preparations on recovery nutrition for rescued personnel, but she hadn't fully considered that the rescue attempt might result in serious injuries or worse. She immediately began preparing broths, protein drinks, and other liquid nutrition options while trying to suppress the images of and his team returning in body bags. Afternoon brought the first concrete news about the mission's progress. The diversionary attacks had succeeded in drawing Taliban reinforcements away from the prison compound, and the primary assault team had reached their target without detection. However, the actual rescue phase was proving more complex than anticipated due to the compound's underground structure. Maria learned that the Taliban had moved the prisoners deeper into the cave system when they detected the approaching rescue force. This meant that Major's team would need to fight their way through multiple levels of fortified positions to reach the Americans. The rescue that had been planned as a quick surgical strike was evolving into a prolonged underground battle. As evening approached, casualty reports began filtering back to the base. 2 members of the rescue team had been wounded in the initial assault, though both remained operational. More concerning was the discovery that the Taliban had booby-trapped several sections of the underground complex, slowing the rescue team's advance and increasing the danger to both the rescuers and the prisoners. Maria received word that the first wounded personnel would be arriving within the hour, transported by medical evacuation helicopters, while the main rescue force continued their underground battle. She immediately shifted into crisis mode, coordinating with Dr. Foster to ensure that nutrition support would be available for injured soldiers who might require extended recovery periods. The sound of approaching helicopters sent everyone on the base into motion. Maria positioned herself at the medical facility with pre-prepared nutrition supplements, ready to support whatever medical intervention might be required. The helicopters landed in clouds of dust and rotor wash, disgorging medical personnel who rushed wounded soldiers into the treatment facility. The casualties were members of the rescue team rather than the captured SEALs, which meant that and his men were still trapped underground while their would-be rescuers fought to reach them. Maria provided nutrition support to the medical team as they worked to stabilize the wounded, but her thoughts remained focused on the ongoing battle beneath the Afghan mountains. Communication with the underground rescue team became increasingly sporadic as they penetrated deeper into the mountain complex. The Taliban's defensive positions had been prepared over years, with multiple fallback positions and intricate knowledge of the cave system's layout. Every meter of advance came at a significant cost in time and ammunition. As night fell, Maria received devastating news from the communications center. The rescue team had encountered a heavily fortified position that blocked their access to the section where the SEALs were being held. Major was requesting additional support, but reinforcements were hours away, and the team was running low on ammunition and medical supplies. The situation deteriorated further when Taliban reinforcements began returning from the diversionary attacks. The rescue team found themselves fighting on multiple fronts, pushing forward toward the prisoners while defending against counterattacks from behind. The carefully planned operation was becoming a desperate battle for survival. Maria spent the night moving between the communications center and the medical facility, providing nutrition support to personnel monitoring the crisis while preparing for multiple scenarios. She prepared emergency rations in case the rescue team needed to remain underground for an extended period, medical nutrition for additional casualties, and recovery meals in case the mission somehow succeeded despite the mounting obstacles. Dr. Foster worked alongside Maria, appreciating having someone who understood the unique nutritional requirements of combat stress and trauma recovery. Together, they developed protocols for treating rescued personnel who might have suffered weeks of poor nutrition and possible torture while in Taliban custody. Dawn was breaking over the base when the most critical news of the entire operation finally arrived. Major's team had broken through the final Taliban defensive position and reached the chamber where the SEALs were being held. After nearly 18 hours of underground combat, they had finally found and his men. The condition of the prisoners was unknown, and the rescue team still needed to fight their way back through the compromised cave system to reach the extraction point. But for the first time since the operation began, Maria allowed herself to hope that her decision to stay behind might result in welcoming her soldiers home rather than mourning their loss. The radio crackled with its voice reporting that all 6 SEALs were alive, though their condition was serious enough to require immediate medical attention. Maria rushed to her kitchen to begin final preparations for their arrival, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether months of caring for these warriors had been worthwhile. The extraction from the underground compound proved nearly as dangerous as the initial rescue. Major's team had to carry 3 seriously injured SEALs while fighting through Taliban positions that had been reinforced during the night-long battle. Maria tracked their progress through radio communications, each update bringing a mixture of hope and dread as the team encountered new obstacles. Lieutenant Commander had suffered a severe beating during interrogation, leaving him with possible internal injuries and a concussion that affected his ability to walk unassisted. Petty Officer, the team medic, had been shot in the shoulder during their initial capture and had received minimal medical attention during their captivity. The other 4 team members were in better physical condition, but showed signs of prolonged stress and malnutrition. The Taliban's final desperate attempt to prevent the rescue involved collapsing sections of the cave system, forcing the combined rescue and SEAL teams to find alternate routes to the extraction point. What should have been a 2-hour fighting withdrawal stretched into 6 hours of underground warfare, with ammunition running critically low and several team members requiring medical attention. Maria coordinated with Dr. Foster to prepare the medical facility for multiple trauma cases while maintaining nutrition support for the personnel coordinating the extraction. She prepared IV fluid supplements, easy-to-digest protein sources, and comfort foods that could help traumatized soldiers begin the psychological process of recovery. The sound of approaching helicopters in the early afternoon sent the entire base into motion. Unlike the previous evacuations that had brought wounded rescue team members, this flight carried the personnel everyone had been waiting for. Maria positioned herself where she could see the landing zone while remaining close enough to the medical facility to provide immediate support. The helicopters landed in a whirlwind of dust and urgency. Medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers as the aircraft doors opened to reveal Major's exhausted team and the rescued SEALs. Maria's heart clenched as she saw being carried on a stretcher, his face pale and swollen from the beatings he had endured. Dr. Foster and her medical team immediately began triage procedures, assessing each rescued SEAL and determining treatment priorities. Maria stayed close by with carefully prepared nutrition supplements, ready to support whatever medical interventions were required. The sight of these warriors in such diminished condition was almost overwhelming, but she forced herself to focus on what she could do to help. Was the first to notice Maria's presence in the medical facility. Despite his shoulder wound and obvious exhaustion, he managed a weak smile and whispered her name. The simple recognition meant more to Maria than any medal or commendation possibly could. After weeks of uncertainty and a day of terror, her soldiers were finally home. And Williams were in better physical condition than Anne, but both showed signs of the psychological stress they had endured. The Taliban's interrogation techniques had been designed to break their spirits as much as extract information. Maria approached them carefully, offering simple foods and familiar faces to help anchor them back to safety. The reunion between Maria and the rescued SEALs was emotional, but subdued by the medical urgency of their conditions. Each man acknowledged her presence in his own way, squeezing her hand weakly from his stretcher, asking if she had saved any of her enchiladas, managing a joke about missing her coffee more than anything else during captivity. Major, exhausted from the prolonged rescue operation, sought out Maria personally to thank her for remaining at the base. Her dedication had inspired his team's efforts and provided crucial support during the most challenging mission of his career. More importantly, her presence meant that the rescued SEALs had immediate access to someone who understood their individual needs and preferences. Dr. Foster worked closely with Maria over the following days to develop recovery protocols for each rescued SEAL. Required careful monitoring due to his head injury, with nutrition limited to easily digestible foods that wouldn't exacerbate potential nausea or cognitive issues. Shoulder wound was healing well, but he needed protein-rich foods to support tissue repair. The psychological recovery proved more complex than the physical healing. All 6 SEALs showed signs of trauma from their captivity, manifesting in various ways including disrupted sleep patterns, hypervigilance, and difficulty trusting their environment. Maria's familiar presence and carefully prepared comfort foods provided an anchor to normalcy that complemented the medical team's professional treatment. Within a week, the rescued SEALs were stable enough for transport to more advanced medical facilities in Germany and eventually the United States. The tearful goodbye between Maria and these warriors she had cared for was witnessed by the entire base personnel, none of whom questioned her decision to stay behind any longer. Despite his injuries, made sure to thank Maria personally before his departure. He told her that during the darkest moments of their captivity, when the Taliban's interrogations were most brutal, he had sustained himself by remembering the comfort of her kitchen and the care she had shown his team. Her choice to remain at the base when others evacuated had provided more support than she could possibly understand. Colonel Hayes personally commended Maria's service during the crisis, noting that her decision to remain had contributed significantly to the successful recovery of 6 elite warriors. The rescue operation had required support from every person at the base, and Maria's nutritional expertise had proven as valuable as any weapon or piece of technology. The base gradually returned to normal operations as new personnel arrived to replace those who had been evacuated. Maria resumed her regular duties, but with a deeper understanding of her role in supporting America's warriors. The kitchen that had once been simply a place to prepare meals had become a symbol of the care and dedication that sustained military operations in hostile environments. 6 months later, Maria received a package from the United States. Inside were letters from each of the rescued SEALs, updates on their recovery progress, and photographs from Sweating, which had been delayed by his captivity but finally celebrated with his full team in attendance. Each letter thanked her for the decision that had brought them home and the care that had helped them heal. Maria Santos had served meals to some of America's most elite warriors, but when they needed her most, she had proven that true service meant refusing to abandon those who depended on her care. Her kitchen in Afghanistan had become more than a place to eat. It had become a symbol of the loyalty and dedication that formed the invisible foundation of military effectiveness. In choosing to stay behind when others evacuated, she had demonstrated that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with unwavering commitment to those who serve.